Galina had been living with her husband for 15 years, and everything seemed fine. They had their fair share of arguments, but they always managed to reconcile and continue with their lives. Everyone believed they had a solid and happy family. However, one day Galina accidentally discovered that her husband had been unfaithful. While standing in line at the store, she overheard a conversation between two women behind her. They were discussing her husband's infidelity, mentioning that he had been seeing Verka, a waitress, despite having a beautiful and intelligent wife like Galina. Shocked and embarrassed, Galina couldn't bear to listen any further. She left her groceries on the conveyor belt and hastily left the store. Back at home, Galina couldn't sit still. She anxiously paced around the apartment, all the while knowing deep down that her intuition was telling her the truth. She desperately tried to suppress her suspicions and dismiss the negative thoughts, but it felt inevitable. The gossip about her husband's affair seemed to be known by everyone except her. Her daughter had already gone to bed, focusing on her homework in her room. In the kitchen, Galina sat in the darkness, waiting for her husband's return. The silence was deafening, and the weight of anticipation hung heavy in the air. Finally, around 12:30, she heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. Every passing second felt like a heartbeat, as if her heart was about to burst out of her chest. As her husband cautiously tiptoed past the kitchen, Galina switched on the light above the table, the sound of the switch piercing through the stillness like a gunshot in the night. Startled, her husband froze, his gaze filled with confusion. "Are you awake?" he asked hoarsely. "I've been waiting for you." "I know everything," Galina stated, gesturing to the chair across from her. Her husband obediently sat down, his hands tightly clasped together, his knuckles turning white. His face grew pale, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. "You're being unfaithful to me," Galina said calmly, her voice filled with disbelief. She had hoped it was all just a misunderstanding, but her husband confessed to everything. She didn't immediately leave him, nor did she kick him out, perhaps out of fear of being alone. Instead, she tried to live with it, but each day it got worse. Eventually, Galina made the difficult decision to take her daughter and move to another town to live with her parents. Galina was a beautiful woman and men pursued her, but she was afraid of entering into new relationships and had trouble trusting anyone. It was one thing to have her husband, with whom she had built a life and shared countless experiences, and another to consider getting involved with a stranger who had his own baggage, experiences from past relationships, and possibly children. As the years passed, Galina's daughter grew up and started her own lively and eventful life. Meanwhile, Galina remained alone. One day, an old school friend reached out to her and invited her to a birthday celebration. "I have nothing to wear," Galina stubbornly insisted. "Why don't I come over to your place in the evening? We can sit, chat, and share a bottle of wine. No house parties. It's my anniversary. I've already made reservations at a cafe. Only my closest friends will be there. Marinka will be there too. Remember her? You won't believe how much weight she's gained. 3 kids, can you imagine? And do you remember Jenka Saidolkin? He's been married for the 3rd time now. And that's not counting the women he's lived with without any legal commitment," her friend explained. "Don't you want to see anyone? If you refuse, I might just forget how to get to your place." Lyudmila playfully threatened, "We can buy you a dress. Let's go shopping this weekend. It's a shame mine won't fit you. And we can also get your hair done. You look stunning with an updo. I'll lend you some earrings to match your dress, and we can do your makeup as well. What do you say?" Luda embraced Galina, and Galina finally gave in. During the weekend, they went out shopping and picked out a stunning black dress for Galina. They also found a beautiful string of pearls and matching earrings. Galina had become adept at styling her own hair, so she elegantly pinned her curly locks at the back of her head, with a few loose strands cascading around her temples. Lyudmila skillfully applied makeup, And when Galina looked into the mirror, she no longer recognized herself. "What are you currently engaged in? I don't recognize myself. Therefore, I have no intention of going anywhere." Galina went to the restroom, and just as she did, her daughter arrived and was taken aback by her transformed appearance. "You can't be older than 30. It suits you," the daughter exclaimed. "It's too bright," Galina complained. "No, it's just right. Why haven't you ever worn makeup like this? You should wear it every day to work," her daughter declared, refusing to let her wash it off. During her Jubilee celebration, Galina received countless compliments that she had never heard before in her entire life. A man at a nearby table even glanced admiringly at her, causing Galina to blush and look away in embarrassment. When the dancing began, Galina remained seated at her table, feeling dizzy from the wine she had consumed. "May I have this dance?" a voice asked. Galina turned her head and saw the man who had been eyeing her. He leaned over slightly and waited for her response. As Galina stood up, she immediately sank back into her chair. "Feeling lightheaded?" he asked understandingly. "My legs are swollen. My shoes are too tight," Galina confessed. "That's because you've been sitting for a long time. Come, let's dance slowly. You'll feel better," he suggested, taking her hand. With calmness and tenderness, he guided her through the dance floor. She could feel his breath gently tasseling the curl near her temple. It had been so long since she had danced. Through the fabric of her dress, she felt the warmth of his hands, and the pleasant scent of his cologne teased her nostrils. "I'm being foolish. First the dancing and his cologne, then I'll catch someone else's scent." A sobering thought crossed her mind. As the music came to an end, they embraced each other in the middle of the hall for a brief moment. Galina was the first to step back, creating distance between them. The man released his hands from her waist, leaving her feeling cold and lonely once again. He escorted her to a table and departed. Sitting next to Galina, Ludmila began to speak. "You see, you didn't want to come. Do you know who that is? That's Sokolov. He's actually a widower. I saw the way he looked at you." Galina dismissed her friend's remarks. "Don't make things up. Why would a man like him be interested in me? He needs a young model, not a divorced woman like me." Ludmila refused to accept Galina's self-doubt. "Don't say that. So what if you're 40? You surpass any model, believe me." Galina decided to act differently. "This is today. Let me wash my face so he won't recognize me. Lud, I'll go. My feet are swollen from walking in uncomfortable shoes." Ludmila offered a suggestion. "Let's ask someone for a ride." Galina declined. "No, I'll take a taxi." Despite Ludmila's pleas, Galina left the room. As Galina walked out of the cafe, she unintentionally bumped into Sokolov. He spoke up. "Are you leaving already? Let me escort you out." His tone did not allow for objections. Galina didn't feel like arguing at that moment. Her shoes were causing discomfort, her head was spinning, and she lacked the energy to walk to the bus stop and wait for the shuttle. So when Sokolov guided her towards his car, Galina quietly sat down in the passenger seat. Sensing her desire, he suggested, "You can take off your shoes." Galina remained silent and chose not to remove them, as it would be difficult to put them back on later. Looking at Sokolov, she curiously asked, "How do you know Ludmila?" As they drove away from the cafe, he replied, "She often comes here for corporate events. This is my cafe." "And what do you do?" Giving Sokolov a brief glance, Galina requested, "Now turn into the courtyard. Second entrance. Stop here." She then opened the car door and expressed her gratitude. "Thank you very much." Galina hurriedly walked towards the entrance, not looking back and attempting to conceal any signs of discomfort. As the door closed behind her, she let out a breath. She chuckled to herself, wondering why she had run as if someone was chasing her. Taking off her shoes, she began ascending the stairs to her floor. Once she arrived home, she removed her elegant dress and jewelry, undoing the barrette in her hair and shaking her head. Casting a final glance at herself in the mirror, she headed into the shower. While brushing her wet hair in front of the mirror, she expressed her disappointment out loud, saying, "Here we go, the princess has turned back into Cinderella," and let out a sigh. The following day, Ludmilla called her. "By the way, I called Sokolov and asked for your phone number." Our friend sang over the phone. Startled, Kalina replied, "And you gave it to him?" Ludmilla reassured her, "No, that's why I'm calling." "Good," Kalina responded. "He liked me yesterday, but today he'll see me without my battle coloring and be disappointed. I don't need to suffer and worry. I'm done. Please tell him that." Ludmilla intervened. "Look, he's a normal guy. Are you going to stay alone until you're old? I would hang your husband, who caused your low self-esteem, by a thread." Interrupting, Kalina expressed, "I just don't want anything," and then suddenly fainted. From that point on, every time Kalina spotted a car on the street that resembled Sokolov's, she jumped and became frightened. However, whether Sokolov was too occupied or whether Ludmilla had conveyed Kalina's wishes to him, he never came. Eventually, Kalina found solace in this realization. The days passed by, one after the other. Yet, she couldn't help but reminisce about the scent of his cologne and the warmth of his hands on her back. One day, a man took a seat next to her on the bus. Kalina caught a familiar fragrance in the air. Curiously, she asked him, "Excuse me, what kind of cologne are you wearing?" He replied, "I'm not even sure. It has some fancy name. My wife gave it to me. Why do you ask? Does it smell bad?" Kalina blushed and, feeling embarrassed, stood up and walked towards the exit. As her daughter's birthday approached, Kalina decided to go grocery shopping on her day off. However, she ended up buying so much that the weight of the bags caused them to cut into her palms, leaving her regretful of her own greed. Kalina scolded herself, thinking she should have either bought fewer items or brought her daughter along to help. On her way home, Kalina reached a tree and decided to take a moment to rest. Placing the bags on the ground, she straightened up and began rubbing her reddened palms. Suddenly, one of the bags gave way, causing the apples to spill out and roll down the sloping sidewalk towards the road. Desperate to retrieve the apples, Kalina hurriedly tried to collect them, but found herself unable to catch up. She watched in dismay as the passing cars crushed the fruit under their wheels. However, her disappointment turned to surprise when a car pulled up by the sidewalk and a man stepped out. To her astonishment, it was Sokolov. Approaching her, he offered assistance, saying, "Here, take these." "Is the bag torn?" Though Sokolov did not recognize her, Kalina instinctively lowered her head, hiding her face, not wanting to reveal her identity. Unsure of how to accept the apples without them rolling away again, she hesitated. "Let me do it myself," Sokolov suggested before heading to the tree, where he put the apples back into a bag. "Are all these bags yours? Let me give you a ride home. They seem heavy, and the handles might break." Before Kalina could object, Sokolov effortlessly lifted the bags and carried them to the car. Reluctantly, Kalina sat in the back seat to hold onto the bags. As they rode, Sokolov caught her gaze in the rearview mirror, and Kalina immediately averted her eyes. Trying to make conversation, he asked, "Are you getting ready for the holiday?" "It's my daughter's birthday," Kalina replied, promptly lowering her head. Guiding him to the correct turn, she instructed, "Turn into the courtyard here." Once they arrived, Sokolov offered to carry the bags to Kalina's apartment. However, she sharply declined, stating, "No need, I'll do it myself," and turned away. Sokolov, observant and curious, looked at Kalina closely and remarked, "Such a bright and beautiful woman lives in this entrance, Kalina. Do you happen to know which apartment?" Mockingly, Galina responded, "We have several of them, ranging from 30 to 80 years old. Which one are you looking for?" With that, she picked up her bags and headed towards the entrance, leaving Sokolov behind.